and what's hard about speaking as a keynote or even as a breakout session leader, if you don't have any training, is that you really are winging it all the time. You're really trying to figure out in the moment what's going to work. And as a result, when something does work, you can't analyze why. So it's very hard to repeat. And when it doesn't work, you often don't know why, because you were just winging it and you don't have the craft.
All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Port, a game changer in my life. I had this dream one night, and I saw this Broadway kind of play. It was a dark room. There were lights on a tall figure, and I was kind of directing it. And then when I woke up, I was like, wow, that was really cool. The crowd was interacting. It was a different way to learn. They were learning, but entertained. And I was like, that's like a one-man show. That's what I should do. And I turned to my wife. I'm like, babe. She's like, what? I'm like, I'm going to do a one-man show. She's like, what the hell is that? I'm like, I'll tell you later. And I called Michael Port. I said, hey, I want to do this one-man show. I think it's a new way to keynote. What do you think? You go, I think it's the future. And see, the thing is, I'd been told by so many people, you are the very best coach when it came to speakers. And I signed up for this thing called A-lister with 9 other speakers that had to do a certain amount of speaking fees to be there. And we're like moments in, you're like, all right, get up and do 4 minutes in front of your peers. And I'm the only one giving feedback. And it was like, holy cow. And it was the hardest 30 minutes I've ever had on stage the next day, because you're like, do something that challenges you. And I was awkward and struggled, and you worked with me, and I was like, that's what I need, is someone that pushes me. And so when I called you, you're like, that's awesome, I'm in. Now, I don't know how many New York Times best-selling books you've written. I've been recommended your books so many times over the years, but I was so grateful that I was able to engage your services. And one of the gifts of my entire life is writing this one-man show with you. I didn't even know how much work you were going to do, and you did more than I anticipated. And you brought great resources to help with screenwriting that I became a lifelong friends with. And I mean, I just think that the very thing that we've created and written there is my instruction manual for living. So I'm so excited for people to get to know Michael, who was an actor. I always like to think of you as Mr. Perfect on Sex and the City. Although you were for sure a firefighter in New York City on a program. You just look like, when you had hair, that's who you were, a firefighter in New York City. But then you went out and keynoted. You've done TED Talks, but I think your real gift is in helping people find theirs and bring it out of them. So yeah, I really appreciate spending the time with you today.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. Look, I adore you. And you just continue to grow on me in so many ways. And what I love about the way that you approach your work and your life is through experimentation. A lot of people would have, had that initial idea and, of doing some sort of one-person show, and then said, that's too big. I couldn't do that. I mean, what do I know about that? And instead you said, I think this could be fun. Let's try. And we were clear about what we wanted to accomplish by a certain time, but then we ended up producing something even better than we expected, because that's the beauty of a collaborative process with people that are really open to making change. Now, you mentioned that A-lister event that you came to, and I remember it like it was yesterday, and it was not yesterday. It was many years ago. And after that first day, Amy and I, my wife, thought, I don't think he's coming back. I'm not sure he's going to come back. He did not look happy after, we did that work. And you were back there the next day doing it again. You were like, I hated that. I was so uncomfortable. Give me more. And at that moment I said, all right, this is somebody that I think I could work with. Because, what's interesting, Garrett, is, I have the pleasure of working with people who are very new to performative keynoting. And I've worked with the best in the business who are working at the top end of the circuit. And ironically, often the people who are working at the top end of the circuit improve the least, not because they're already so effective. That's what you'd assume. It's not often that. It's often because it's sometimes too hard for them to make changes after they've been doing something in a certain way for a long period of time, because their identity is tied to the way they behave in that particular medium. And you, on the other hand, said, no, I want to continue to reinvent myself. I don't want to stay in this same identity, because that developed, over a certain period of time based on a whole number of factors. And I want a different experience for the next number of years. And that was pretty cool. So just good on you for doing that. And I think as a result, we created something really special.
Well, Tucker Max once said that everybody has a book in them. And I was like, dude, definitely don't believe that. But what his sentiment was, is I think everybody has a voice that could be heard through some form of art. Mm-hmm. And for you, if someone wants that voice to be heard in spoken word, on stage, in performance, you're incredible. And just to give an example, so I did A-Lister, it was 2 days. And when you said just start with something that you struggle with, well, in 2014, I did a talk at Mastermind Talks, and the winner gets 25 grand. And the topic was not my normal topic. It was how to create extraordinary relationships, especially marriage. It just happened to be that Jason heard me doing one-off talk at Joe Polish's event and was like, you need to come do this. And I was talking to Joey Coleman, who is a client of yours, and he's like, you should start with a story. Well, I've never started with a story. That's never happened. And I started with a story, and it was just really flat. My wife was there. She's like, what was that? Like, I still took, like, second place. I would have definitely took first if I would have done my normal format, or if I would have had your coaching first, because I could have started with the story. So I was like, why was that starting with a story so awkward? So that's when I got up on stage and started with the story with you, and it was awful. It was just painful, but you worked through it with me, and that story is now a big part of the one-man show, actually. Yeah. But after that 2 days, there was a day off, and then I spoke to a group of like 500 dentists in Florida, and I used a lot of what I learned in A-Lister. Like, I was like, I'm going to use 3 major things. If I do more than 3, it's going to be overwhelming. But what are the 3 main things? I'm like, number 1, I'm really going to use the staging and blocking of how I'm separating the concepts and spatially anchor those, so that when I go and reiterate it, I'll see if they remember it. So I'd be like, and I would go there and they would say it out loud, right? And I'm like, cool, we've done that. I was like, I'm going to use a lot more pause. I just don't pause enough. I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to pause, and I'm going to allow for things to land. And then 3, when that 30 minutes of trying to tell the story, I'm like, I'm going to tell that story with the coaching that you gave me. So I rehearsed it the day before. I went there, I do that, I got a standing ovation. But when I walk off stage, more people came to talk to me than normal. A lot of times I'm so intense, a lot of people don't necessarily like just come up and talk. And one guy is just bawling and holding me. He's like, that just reached me. And it's like, that was the impact of what you were working with me on. Mm-hmm. So when it was this idea for One Man Show, I was like, I'm calling Michael, let's do this thing. And I remember you're like, yeah. And so it was a good size investment, and it was an investment of time of flying out there. And I remember you're like, okay, I read this, book I was writing. By the way, finally finished that book. Just finally finished it. It's so much better than it started. And I think a lot of it was the work that we did. It's definitely my best work. But you're like, okay, so obviously there's these 4 money personas. You're going to act those 4 out, right? And I'm like, obviously. I did not have that in mind, Michael. You just said, I was like, well, obviously. And I remember this was the second most painful moment on stage. You're like, all right, let's get up there and let's act out these characters after we wrote it. And I was so awkward and just brutal. And this is the thing that's been helping me to heal my inner child and be more fully expressed, and as a gift that performs on a daily basis. So I want to acknowledge and say thanks, and just give you some space to talk about that. But sure. You said, obviously, I don't know if you knew I didn't have that original plan, but was thankful that you brought that into the plan. Oh yeah, I knew that was not the plan. I just figured if I assumed the sale, you'd go, okay. And I did. I was like, yeah, let's act. No, but I do think it's if possible, it's a good idea for the creative artist to feel like they were part of the idea generation, so that it's not something that they're just taking on and doing, that say the director said you have to do this, but that they feel came from choices that they made as well. And so to me, it was very clear that you had already been leaning into that choice without even recognizing it. Part of my job as a director is to help see things that you already have an instinct about, but don't know how to act on it.
And part of my job is to help you make choices so you can follow through on that instinct. You know, you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to address, because I think it was really very, very powerful for you and your audiences. And I was also, I think, provocative for you, because I think it's provocative for most of us. One of the things that you discover over time as a performer, even as just a communicator, is that often your best bag of tricks, or the things that make you really unique and pretty exciting and charismatic, are often the things that you need to play against in order to create contrast. So you mentioned that when you speak, or in the old days when you speak, sometimes people didn't come up to you because you're so intense, they were a little intimidated. But when you recognized that there's a lot of power in actually playing against what would be called type, it often allows people to see you from a different perspective. It allows you to perform using different ways of being, and you create a much more well-rounded experience for the audience, so that they actually feel much more connected to you. So in your case, the amount of power that you have, the drive that you have, it's incredible. And it's served you for many, many years, really put you head and shoulders above a lot of the people that you were speaking with, because you had this natural ability to drive a group of people. But when you learned how to harness that, so you could take that power and put it into really small, simple, often quiet moments, all of a sudden that power was 5x'd or 10x'd, because you got so much power into the simple moments that it felt really compelling to an audience. Whereas all the power that you'd bring before would be very exciting at first, but if you get too much of it for too long, you know, it can take some work for the audience to keep up. And then also they just may be a little bit intimidated. So I think for a lot of folks who are watching now, you know, they may recognize that they have strong personalities. A lot of entrepreneurs have strong personalities of one type or another. But sometimes those strengths that we have, when we bring them into our performances, they only take us so far. We need to figure out how to harness that kind of power in different ways of being on stage, so we can connect with people in different ways based on what is appropriate for that very moment.
Yeah, and if we were to unpack that, so people would say, you're so passionate, you're such a good speaker, that's not about them when they say those two things.
Correct.
And so if I would start asking, like, well, what resonated with you the most? And then there's so much that they have to start unpacking, because there was no pause. And so what you said is, you're like, let's imagine there's 4 different modes of speakers. You're like, you're really killing it with this one mode, but there's these other 3 are just not even there.
Yeah.
And so why was that? Well, insecurity was part of it. Just, I knew that I could go up there, I could bring that energy, I could be rated as a really good speaker, but the question was, did this truly transform or impact the audience to the highest level?
Yeah.
And why was I doing that? Well, because it worked, because I learned how to do it, but to pause required a different level of comfortableness that I had to have in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more a gift to the audience for processing and for allowing and for having elements of suspense. And so that took me doing some work, as you know, and was also a gift, because it meant, all right, let's go heal some childhood stuff. Let's find out where these insecurities are. Let's see what this is going to take. And then, to make matters even more good, for a good situation for me was, I started doing comedy. And so comedy was like, I remember Norm, who's my CEO at Wealth Factory, he was like, he came to see me do comedy. He goes, I didn't know you could speak that slow. Because I'm like, every word counts. I'm really articulate. I'm pausing for the laughter. He was like, what? He's like, I've never seen that guy before. And so it's been kind of fun to play in these different realms. And I would still say this one-man show is the most challenging of those, because to act out 4 characters, to play guitar and take people through an exercise, and then as a 44-year-old white man, take people through a spoken word exercise to have it really resonate and land, it still challenged me in a positive way every day. And so thanks
Yeah.
for that.
Well, let's give people a little bit more help around pausing, because many people, and I'm sure you have, you included, have been told that they talk too fast, and they've been told to slow down. They say, slow down, you talk too fast. Now, what happens if you slow down? Imagine that now already you're afraid. I think we're losing subscribers, Michael. People are dropping off right now, because it would drive you mad to have to listen to someone who spoke that slowly. The human brain can follow language quickly. In fact, it needs the drive behind the language to understand what to follow and where to go. But if you don't give them that beat, if you don't give them that pause, it's very hard for them to consume what you have to say and process it. Because look, our job is to create transformational experiences for the audience. Just like if you're building a company, your job is to create transformational experiences for your customers, or to solve problems for your customers, provide solutions for your customers. A speaker's job is to create some sort of transformation through both entertainment and insight. What most people do when they approach speaking is they approach it from an expert perspective. Well, here's what I know, and I know that is important information, so I'm going to tell the audience this information, and that should be enough because it's the right information. Now, you've been in money your whole life. You know that just giving somebody the right information does not change their behavior. In order to change how somebody thinks, so we can change what they do, we first need to change how they feel. In order to change what somebody does, we have to change how they think. And in order to change what they think, we first need to change what they feel. If we change how they feel, then they will change what they think, or are more likely to. And so what you're able to do with your one-person show is influence the audience right from the get-go. You were able to change how they feel about all of the different topics that you're addressing, so that they're able to start thinking differently, so they can change the way they see the world, so that when they leave, they can actually go and do something differently. And that's the key. And that is actually the most challenging part of public speaking, keynoting, and really any type of communication, is not bearing down on the facts, or bearing down on the idea, or bearing down on what is right. Instead, it's focusing on, well, how does this person feel right now? And how do they need to feel in order to be able to change what they think, so they can change what they do, which is actually what they want to change. And then our job is to create content and be able to deliver that content with entertainment that then delivers insight throughout. So one of my good friends, and also a client, someone I've worked with on his speech as well, is a speaker named Ron Tite. I think he's one of the best in the business. He's Canadian. And he used to be a stand-up comic. That was what he did for many years. And he said, you know, when you're a comic, your job is to get a laugh. If they laugh, you did your job. Great. Okay. So you hear a laugh. Good. That joke worked. Okay. As a speaker, your job is to get this. Oh, or, ah, mm-hmm. When you get that, mm-hmm, or ah, or oh, then you've landed an insight. And that's a really important distinction. And I think what you're doing with your work, and I think what we were able to do with your one-person show, and you're doing also with your comedy, is you're delivering both. Very rarely do comedians do that. They just usually deliver laughs. If they are just delivering insights, then they're usually considered keynoters. But when you can put the two together, both entertainment and insight, well, then you create transformational experiences for your audience. And it's a very different approach, but it's really what audiences want. Audiences do not go to watch speeches to hear anything pedestrian. They want a representation of the largeness of life. That is what they want. And our job as performers up there is to be the vessel through which those really big ideas flow. It has never been about us. It is not about us. If it's about the performer, it will not land in the way that it could. And ultimately, it makes it a lot easier when you recognize that what you're creating to deliver to the audience is the product, right, and you're helping deliver that product. So if there's something not working, you just fix it in the product. It's nothing wrong with you. Doesn't mean that somehow you're deficient or broken or, should be embarrassed or feel shame because you screwed up a moment in the speech. It's just the product. So we look at it as a product, and we look at it with as much removal as we possibly can, as we are deeply connected to it, just like you do when you're developing products in a business. You just got to fix what's working to make sure it delivers everything you promise and more.
So how does this relate, like speaking on stage, to just everyday communication and conversation? What are the differences, but what are the similarities or the things that people could take from that?
Well, so if you're on a big stage and you're delivering a large scale performance for an audience, it's very unlikely that you would transfer that same way of being to the dinner table with your kids at home. I feel like
there are some things, I think, from stage that is stupid and people still do it, that you would never do. Like yes or yes is stupid.
Oh, that's something else. Yeah.
Right. But it's weird. I think you and I could just do a whole couple hours on the dumbest things people still do from stage that are like, why are they doing this?
Well, yeah. So I'll address that real quick, and then I'll pop back to the other bit about, which aspects of public speaking translate to, everyday communication. But look, you use this saying that sometimes you'll see speakers use when they'll make a point and then they'll go yes or yes, which of course is eliminating any option. So you have only one option to say yes. And I think it may have been T. Harv Eker who was doing that a lot.
That's who I remember first saying it.
Yeah. And it got very popular. And I make a point not to be critical, because I really do feel that everybody is doing their best. Nobody goes on stage to do anything but their best. Like, who would go up there and be like, I think I'm gonna stink up the joint today. Like, I'm gonna do some really stupid stuff. Like, nobody does that. Everybody's, I'm gonna do my best. And so what happens is that may have worked very well for T. I don't know, what do you call him? T. Harv? I don't know what his actual name is.
You know what T stands for in T. Harv Eker?
What?
The.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So I guess I'll call him the. So maybe it worked very well for the. And that was effective. But what happens is people go and watch the speak, and then they say, oh, I should be like the, and I should do the same thing. So then it starts trickling down. Someone else sees them do the same thing. So here's what I did when I first started 20 years ago as a speaker. I saw as many speeches as possible. I watched everything, because I think if you're going to do something, you got to be in it. You got to see it. I mean, I was a professionally trained performer, but as an actor, and it's not the same thing. So I had to watch a lot. And I noticed there were certain things that were done consistently again and again and again and again and again and again. So then I have to analyze those things. Why are they doing them? And if I couldn't figure out why they're doing them, then often it was not effective. If I understood why they were doing them, then I can ask, is it effective? But what I found is the things that were consistently done by many different speakers often were things that were ineffective because they were copied, because they trickled down from somebody who was doing it before them, who was not necessarily well-trained or a professional. They didn't even know it was effective. And so as a result, you have all these speakers doing the same things. People will come out, open a speech, try to tell a couple jokes, and then they'll go, okay, let's get started. Of course, they already started. As soon as the bio is read, it's already started. The bio is actually the opening to the speech. Or they'll come out and say, I'm really happy to be here, which the 7 other speakers earlier in the day also said. Because, what's the alternative? That you're pissed off that you're there? Be like, hey, listen, I'm really fucking pissed that I'm here. But I'm going
I'm
to
here
do
to
my
talk about
best.
the PPP. You know, if I had to talk about PPP, if you remember those days when I was trying to help people navigate that
I used to
COVID
haze
stuff.
you about
Ooh,
that every time we get
yeah.
on the Zoom. I'm like, so can you? I've got a question about the PPP, Garrett, because people were calling you nonstop. You're like, I'm not.
And I wanted to help them. I just didn't want to ever talk about it again.
You're like, at this point, I can't do this anymore. So, in any event, I just think you got to watch out for anything that you're doing just because you've seen somebody else do, but you haven't questioned why, to what effect. And what's hard about speaking as a keynote or even as a breakout session leader, if you don't have any training, is that you really are winging it all the time. You're really trying to figure out in the moment what's going to work. And as a result, when something does work, you can't analyze why. So it's very hard to repeat. And when it doesn't work, you often don't know why, because you were just winging it and you don't have the craft. But if you develop some basic craft, if you understand some basic processes for ideation, for script writing, for rehearsal, and then for delivery, you could be at the top 1% of speakers because the bar actually is not that high. So I think that's one thing to consider. Now, back to the question about what transfers.
Right.
So as I said, if you're doing a big, your big theatrical one-man show, if you were doing that at the dinner table where you're like changing costumes every 5 minutes, doing a different accent. Actually, at our dinner table, we do a lot of different accents. We have like a whole Russian thing that we do. Then there's an Australian thing, and it's part of the fun.
Well, because Amy's an actor as well, so between the two of you, yeah.
The kids are actually better than we are at it at this point. But in any event, that just wouldn't apply. But there are certain things, like I mentioned before, focusing on how people feel, that applies. And another example is being really, really goal-oriented in conversations. This is harder than it sounds. I remember many, many years ago, in 2008, when I got divorced. My ex-wife and I got along pretty well, but every once in a while we'd have a little bit of an issue around something. And I remember sometimes I get frustrated, and as a result, I'd start saying things or talking about things that took us in a different direction and ended up creating more conflict, or she'd do the same. And so I decided to start specifically just focusing on my objective. Like, okay, well, if my objective is to have us design the, like Jake's custody schedule in a certain way, I'm going to focus on that. And everything that I say or do will speak to that. Every response that I have to whatever she says is in service of that. And as a result, I didn't get triggered because I kept this filter going through my head. Is that going to help me get closer to the goal? Is responding to that going to help me get closer to the goal? If that upsets me, is it going to help me get closer to the goal? And as a result, I think we became much more effective in our communication, both of us, even though she wasn't at that time practicing that same exercise. And so, some people might say, well, Michael, that seems kind of manipulative. You're focused on a goal. You want to try to produce that outcome. So now you're going to try to manipulate the conversation to get to that point. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're trying to, inappropriately manufacture an outcome that is not in the best interest of both parties, okay, that's not so cool. But we are always operating with an agenda. That's what human beings do. Whether we realize it or not, we all have an agenda. Sometimes it's just an agenda to get more attention. Sometimes it's an agenda to release the negative feelings that we have. Sometimes it's an agenda just to show somebody else we're right. Sometimes it's an agenda. I could go on forever. So we always have an agenda. But if we can be more specific about what the outcome could look like, and we can just focus on that, we tend to be much better communicators, and we tend to have much less conflict in our life.
And I think that part of that is if we stick to that topic, we're less likely to hit some escapism we don't want, that prevents us from getting to the solution because we're uncomfortable with that conversation in the moment. Or, I just noticed like it's easy for people to get caught up in something that happens on the news versus what they actually want to have, come to fruition because they're uncomfortable to ask for what they want or to address the situation at hand.
Yep.
And so that happens in communication quite often.
Yep, it sure does.
So Heroic Public Speaking is your company.
Yeah.
Now that people are back hanging out in person, what have you guys been up to, and what have you been doing? I mean, not only did you have COVID, you had an entire flood and hurricane come through or something.
We did, yeah. So obviously 2020 shut down in-person programming, and we do a lot virtually already, so we were able to make the shift over to it. It wasn't my favorite time of my life, but we made it through.
I like the in-person more. It's
I love the in-person. I just love being with people.
A lot of talking to screens in 2020.
Yeah. Now in 2021, the first half of the year, we couldn't do any in-person events, and then we started back in August. So we had July. We had a July and August of 2021 in-person event. And then September 1st, Hurricane Ida came through and destroyed our 10,000 square foot headquarters and everything in it. Totally destroyed. So we were, we had to figure out what to do, because now we're back in business, but we have no space. So we ended up within 1 month finding another space at the other end of town on the second floor, about 50 feet off the ground. So no flood issues there, because the first flood,
we were learning from this.
Exactly. The first flood, we had 5 feet of water all throughout 10,000 square foot.
Yeah, you sent me some pictures. It looked gnarly.
It was brutal. And so then we found a new space, and we had to cancel one event in September. October, we back up and running. And I'll tell you, it has been incredible ever since. The events are back. We've got waiting lists for all of our introductory events for the rest of the year. I mean, it's just it feels great. Everybody's back out there making a bigger commitment to really advancing important ideas and important causes, trying to make the world a better place, one speech at a time.
So you say you work with people that are just starting, and then obviously there's stuff I don't know if you still do A-lister or what the version of that is today.
I do something called HPS Pro, which is closer to what we do, where I'll work with somebody one-on-one for a year, where we work on the whole thing. I direct the speech. That's a pretty big commitment of time, and you got to have some big goals to do something like that. But we do run very comprehensive 6-7 month training programs for people who really do want to be best in class at delivering keynotes and breakout sessions. We do a complimentary or free 2-day workshop by referral only. So the people who go through our programs understand what we do. It's not for everybody. And so what we discovered over time was that the people who really had the best outcomes were the ones who were referred by other people who had the best outcomes. So we just said, we're just going to take referrals from here on in. We don't pay for them. We don't have big campaigns around them, but our alumni refer regularly. You generously refer regularly. And as a result, we have, waiting lists for those programs, but the people who go there don't have to pay because they are referred by somebody who is a really big, important part of our community and our life. We ask everybody to put a deposit down, which we just give them back when they walk in, just to hold their seat.
Just so that they got skin in the game. Makes total sense.
And the reason, and part of the reason we do this, and it, we haven't really talked about scale on this, but one of the reasons that we do these 2-day free events is because when you offer something that is unusual, that has no comparison in the marketplace, it's very hard for people to really get what it is. Even if you're a great communicator, even if you're good at marketing and messaging, you still need to experience it to truly understand it. Even people who are watching now, they say, well, it sounds like it must be a pretty rigorous process. Well, yes, but it's incredibly fun. It really is life-changing and transformational. But you can't really understand it until you've been in it. So we just said, we're just going to take away this issue of paying so people can come check it out. And then, just like at Wealth Factory, the majority of the people there say, oh, I want to do more. And all we need to do is say, we have this other thing. And they go, great, let's do it. So we found over time that it just got simpler to do best in class work and not be marketers, and allow our alumni
Community and
to,
word of mouth to be the process.
yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
I sold Wealth Factory, right?
Yep.
That was a scaling issue because I'm a founder that would bring all this energy and excitement and then abandon them because I'd go work on my one-man show or write a book. And so that's been great because I sold it to my partners and they've actually scaled it. And now I can focus more on content creation and performance and comedy, although I've been really trying to navigate that whole comedy thing because you saw last year when I did comedy and that was very rehearsed, very planned out. And so this tour I've been doing for the first time, no plan, just go up there with nothing in mind and see what happens.
Wow.
And actually it's been more crowd work, more spontaneous, more
Nice.
random, a little more edgy because it's just my normal
Yeah.
brain versus
Not as much filter.
Yeah, not as much
Yeah.
filter, but yeah, I have a set tomorrow night. It should be pretty sold out, pretty big venue, so I'm excited about that. But I do like a workshop during the day,
Yeah.
and then that night I'm going to go do comedy. So I'm kind of figuring out that balance between how do I make comedy become more of my corporate keynote because it leads to something versus when I go into a club, they laugh and that's it. It's
Yeah.
like, cool, that there's no real transformation to that. And as much as it's fun for me, I don't know that it's really part of my life. And I'm investing in how we're going to get this one-man show out there because saying a one-man show means nothing to almost anyone. I mean, they don't know what that is. It's just a new way to keynote, so thanks for your help and all that. But man, what a crazy ride. I think I hired you to do this in October of 2018. Or was it October?
No, I think it was, I don't know, it was a little later than that. I mean, we were like deep in it when COVID
like
hit.
Summer of 2019.
Yeah.
We had the script October of 2019, and then I was preparing for nobody doing keynotes because then it was, but then I was like, I just worked on that on a regular basis, evolved the script, and had a long way to go with growth of being able to perform it. Definitely a lot different than anything else I've done.
Well, you sold your business to your partner. My partner's my wife. Maybe I can sell it to her. She's not going to give me what I want for it.
Maybe we think of a really cool tax strategy for that, right? Like if you're a C corporation, you've been around for 5 years, we'll do a 1202. You could sell it for 10 million. There's no tax on that sell.
We are. There we go.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting. It's been an interesting time because we received actually 2 offers for the business since last spring. And, I wasn't building the business to exit in that way. It's a very founder dependent business at present, but it's been really interesting because it's opened up my mind to some different possibilities that I hadn't really considered before. It's interesting. A lot of the folks that go into thought leadership business are building businesses around their ideas and often around their personalities. And one of the things I recognized as a result of these conversations with private equity groups was that over the years, I realized why I built so much of the businesses that I have built, Book Yourself Solid first, Rogue Public Speaking second, around my skills is because I think I felt that if I wasn't adding tremendous value personally, I didn't deserve all of the riches that came with it. Meaning I didn't have this sensibility like a lot of entrepreneurs do where, I can just buy the self-storage. I don't have to do a damn thing, hire a manager and just collect the checks. Now, I'm not saying it's that easy to do it, but you understand my point. Right. I was always looking at the businesses that I built as it required me to add value, not just capital but me to actually deliver. And of course, I think a lot of thought leaders are like that. You really want to be a critical piece of the value chain. And until we recognize that there are different ways to add value, it's going to be hard to get ourselves out of the business. And I've been able to do that with Book Yourself Solid, where it's run by a different team. I will advise accordingly, but I'm not in delivering anymore. And so, for those folks who are in the service space or thought leader space, and they're thinking about this idea of scaling, what does it really mean? people
Yeah.
use that term and they throw it around in a lot of different ways. So, some could say our business is scaled because we can do group programs in an area where it very rarely has anybody ever figured out how to do that effectively. And we have. So that's scale compared to just working with people one-on-one, but it's not really scale because we still have to do it. It's not
Right.
scale that, allows you to scale to high heaven. So if
But
there's
the question comes
anything
down
that
to
I've
if you
learned over the
enjoy
years
doing
is that,
that,
what?
right? Part of it's if you enjoy doing that. Like
If
some
you
people
enjoy doing that.
scale
Yeah.
out of their enjoyment,
Yeah.
and size takes over their fulfillment.
Right. And, I think at different stages of your career, you're going to be interested in different things.
Right.
So, I may, be really interested in pursuing M&A strategies for the next 3 to 5 years because I find it really interesting and fun. Well, that's a cool way to go, but it's not the only way to go. I might find it really fun to create a whole slew of licensed trainers, have them go out as master trainers into corporations, train those trainers, then they train their employees. We get licensing fees. It's a great model. I don't know. But my point is that it's okay to start, to have a number of years where you're focusing on different things in your business and finding different ways to add value and not be stuck in the idea that you need to be part of the delivery system of the products in order to be valuable. Like, I don't want my employees to think I'm not doing anything because I'm not delivering. But
Right.
of course I'm doing things. I'm just, not going to do as much of that. You see what I'm saying? So it's got to be individual. We can't use anybody else's, formula for what scale means or what success means. We can't, just sort of get into a clique of people that seem cool and just, follow whatever they're doing because we're not sure. I think we got to make our own choices.
Yeah, because then you lose fulfillment. I think that a lot of people have just, I mean, I don't know, we're not Wall Street guys that go, oh, let's just buy this, implement this process, and then get this value out of this company and turn around and sell it. Like, that doesn't interest me. I know there's a way to do that,
Yeah, it's
half
an
the
amazing
time
thing
that's
to do, but
yeah, it's just not who I am. And I think that when people try to copy something to get a result that they think will make them happier because it is a bigger result, but it comes at the expense of their value or their values or what they want to do. I mean, I just, I don't ever see myself not writing or not performing. Like, but if I was in a grind where I had to do that, it definitely removes that enjoyment. So I think having financial independence where you have some cash flow to cover your expenses gives you the freedom to make a choice in what you want to do, and then make sure you're defining the game by your own rules. So the point that you make is very important.
Well, look, Garrett, I'm a personal finance geek, and I love this stuff because early in my life, I didn't know, anything. I mean, I made every bad decision you could possibly make. And over time I realized, oh, I see. If I'm really good on the personal finance side, then I have so many more options in my business. If I want to take a year or two off, I could do that because my personal finances are solid. And one of the things I've noticed over the years, developing friendships with entrepreneurs like us, just seeing people in the business and how they operate, very often the entrepreneur spends a lot of time learning about marketing or learning about sales or learning about operations, or they'll go, and do an expensive program on how to scale or how to, put an operating system into the business, whatever it is. But if you ask them, so what are you doing to learn about personal finance and investing so that you can create independence? They'll go, what do you mean? I got a guy. How's it going? I don't know. I mean, I just get a statement once a year. Well, what does the statement say? I don't know.
Right. They just think making more money will solve all of it, even if that's leaking all
Correct.
over
That's
the
exactly
place
what I
on the
thought.
person's
I always
side.
thought,
Yeah.
well, it doesn't matter. I'll just make more money. Why do I have to think about this stuff? Man, I'll tell you the freedom that I now feel from continuing to ask myself, what's enough?
Right.
Because I'm a maximizer, man. I want everything. Like, there's not enough cookies in the bag. Like, one cookie, not enough. I like the whole bag, or, whatever it is. I want like the deep experience to do it all. And that can really be tough sometimes. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are like that. You tend to be less satisfied because whatever you do is not as good as you think it should be, or as big as you think it should be. But if you start really getting comfortable with the concept of enough, and you say, well, I know what enough is now, well, all of a sudden things get a lot easier, because you don't feel like everything you hear, you got to go, oh, I got to try that, and I got to do this, and what's
Right.
next, and oh, I got to drive here, and I got to push here. You go, I don't actually need to do anything for the next couple of days because everything's fine.
And when
Like,
you have choice, then there's space to be creative. There's space
yeah,
to enjoy that work.
yeah,
I mean, I think that the word contentment is almost like a bad word, but I look at it as like, oh, when I'm content, it doesn't mean I'm complacent. It just means that I'm present. It means
yeah,
that I'm happy in the moment, like I'm
yeah,
okay. But the
yeah.
world is like, no, you're on the treadmill. You got to run, and even if you're not getting anywhere, just be busy. Like that's
Yeah.
what like it's this whole
Garrett,
consumeristic
that
mindset.
reminds me of something that one of my students at Heroic Public Speaking was focused on in her speech. Her name's Sue Geyer, and she addresses this concept that she calls success bullying.
Mm,
And I'd never heard that phrase before, that term before, but it made sense. It's like sometimes in the self-help and the business help industry, you get kind of pushed into some idea of success, and then this idea, sometimes sort of like bullied into doing more and being more. And I just thought it was an interesting way to look at it. And I don't think that's the case, of course, in all situations or for everyone. But sometimes I do feel that, at least I've felt in my experience, that there have been times when if I'd go to an event or I'd be hanging out with a bunch of, other entrepreneurs, that there was always this kind of like, why aren't you doing more? Why don't you do this? Like, why aren't you leveraging this? Or why don't you exploit that? Or you've got this over here, but you're not doing that. I'm going, I know, I mean, I felt pretty good with what I'm doing, right? Like, I think this is fun, you know?
right. That's like the competitive zero sum game. Like what's wrong? Like that's the striver, right? That's the
Right.
striver, which is the money persona that says, they're always going for more. It's always about the future at the expense of the present, and it's what else can I do? And there's a lot of downside to that. I remember standing in a wedding line, and the person next to me is like, "Hey, man, I know you're referring people on these real estate deals. Are you getting paid on that?" I'm like, "Nah, that's not really my area of expertise or focus." He's like, "Well, dude, you should set up a hard money lending fund. You know how much I'm making doing hard money lending? Like, and you've got all these clients that would do it." And so the greed gland, the whole wedding, I'm just thinking about, why am I not doing this hard money lending? So I find
Yeah.
partners, we set up the hard money lending fund. We're doing all this hard money lending from 2004, 5, 6, 7, and I'm not taking distributions. I'm just growing the company and growing the company. And then 2008 comes, and all of those years' work was gone. We
Yeah.
gave people back less than what they put in, and I did a lot of work to have that pain and frustration, not because it was part of who I was, not because it's what I really want to do, not because it brought any level of passion or that I was uniquely an expert in it. It was
Yeah.
simply because that's what someone else was doing and I was missing a so-called opportunity. But here's the thing, Mike. I mean, more people are distracted, or they think it's an opportunity, but it's just a distraction disguised as an opportunity. And
Yes.
this is the hardest thing because those distractions are seductive.
Right.
And if the game is more, if the game is sacrifice, then enough and contentment always lose out to more and sacrifice. And also health misses out, family misses out, everything. And usually the best gifts that we have would miss out, because where would you, like, I had space to think about a one-man show because I went to Italy for a summer. There was a lot of downtime. I got to think about what I wanted to do. I got into comedy because of it. People
Yeah.
don't have enough downtime because they're on the busy treadmill.
Yeah. I wish I got that earlier, the importance of downtime. When you're in your 20s, 30s, you just got so much energy, you sort of feel like you can just go
Yeah.
forever. And maybe some people feel like that in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s too. But without that downtime, your brain just does not have the space to process. And if you're really going to do high level creative work, you need that time. I mean, one of my favorite authors on this subject is Cal Newport, who wrote Deep Work,
Yep.
among other books. And if we're not doing deep work, we are probably not growing, personally or professionally. And, growth doesn't mean bigger. Growth just means more meaningful to me. That's what it means. Unless, it's like a mole that shouldn't be there. That's not meaningful. I don't want that. But when it comes to, like your work and your relationships, you need that time to sit and think. So, I had August, we take it off, and I would spend I get up at 3:00 in the morning. It's ridiculous. So from like 3 to 8 o'clock in the morning, those are deep work hours. I mean, they're so much fun. I was going through this, this sort of reimagination of what the business will look like over the next 5 years. And I've built so many different models that you'd think I was like the guy from A Beautiful
You're a
Mind.
serial killer. You look
Yeah,
like
or a serial killer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or
Although,
like the CIA looking for the serial killer.
Although to be fair,
yeah.
I don't know if it works on here, but if I take off my glasses and I don't smile, I actually do kind of look like a serial killer. So, and when I do that joke from the stage, people laugh just too hard, just a little bit too hard.
Like, oh, ouch.
Yeah.
There's some jokes I tell them, I'm like, that wasn't meant to be that funny. That's hurtful that you laugh that hard. Yeah.
Exactly right. So in any event, I don't know what I was talking about.
We're basically talking about you've made all these maps because you have all the time.
Oh yeah, but I wouldn't have been able to do it. And it doesn't mean I'm going to do them. I've got to.
That's why you told me never text you after 8 p.m. because you're just asleep.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's true. 8 o'clock. If it's after 8, it's I don't see it.
That's what happens when you get up at 3.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a full day.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you spending some time and like to bring it to the scaled side because we're busy just talking about speaking and all that kind of stuff because it's just great to catch up and I want people to know about your expertise and the value that you provide in the world because you really are world class at what you do and it's been a gift in my life and I truly appreciate it. But it's also great to talk about personal finance, the topic that I obviously have had so much background in, and that you see that people don't plug those leaks, keep more of what they make. They think they're just going to make more, but then that just goes out the other side. They spend all this time trying to scale a business where, hey, what if they could just get 10% more from a little bit of savvy? And then, and by the way, that 10%, like think about it, if someone makes more money, just real quick is, let's say they make an extra $10,000, but what did it cost to make that $10,000? Did they have cost of goods sold? Did they have labor? Like, what do they end up with in their pocket by the time that trickles down with variable and fixed expenses? Maybe their margin's 30%, which would be a huge, great margin. That's 3,000. Maybe they're more like 20 or 10% where a lot of businesses are. If they're a restaurant, who knows, 2%, like that's pretty tough. And so how much did they walk away with? Where if they save tax or they save on interest or they save on insurance costs that are just not designed properly, or they save on non-performing fees with their investments, that could be $10,000 that's spendable cash that's right there. Maybe they have to pay a CPA $1,000 of the dollars, right? So maybe it's only 9,000, but it's still a much higher margin. So I'm glad that you made that point and that making sure before you scale, like what you want in life and what you want your life to look like, and then ultimately how to communicate. And if you feel like you want to speak, if you feel like you want to communicate on a stage or perform, like heroic public speaking, you got to get referred in. But they can grab your newer book. You have Referable Speaker that would be a good place for people to start and understand what the speaking business is like.
Yeah.
What if they're just interested in being a speaker just for local stuff? Is that still a good book, or what do you recommend?
Oh yeah, no. See, the Referable Speaker is a perfect book for somebody who either is a pro or wants to be a pro, or they're an entrepreneur or an executive who uses speaking a lot to advance their brand and their business. They got to understand how the whole space works in order to excel. So those are the folks who should read that book. It's a pretty quick read, but it will be a game-changing book, and it probably will be provocative because you'll learn a lot about the industry that's different than what you thought. So that's that. But if you don't want to be a pro and you just want to work on your communication skills, give better pitches or presentations at the office or a short speech here and there, then read Steal the Show. That was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It came out in 2015. And it really does focus on finding your voice, the performer's mindset and perspective, as well as it's a tour de force on public speaking techniques as well. And then there's the podcast, Steal the Show with Michael Port. is a place they can go start checking things out. And if they really do want to come to heroic public speaking, they could ask you if you'll refer them. So then, you'll have to decide.
All right. Well, hey, thanks, man. Great to spend a little bit of time with you. Appreciate your insights and your
Appreciate
energy
you too, man.
and everything. So
Okay, proud of you.
thanks, man. If you enjoyed this episode of Getting Scaled, I love interviewing fascinating people, asking them plenty of questions so we can discover what worked for them in life, what didn't work, where they made mistakes, and where they had triumphs, and how all that happened, and then just maybe have a good conversation so that it's entertaining along the way. If you like that, there's more Getting Scaled episodes. Why don't you click through and discover a new one?